again, simple example, if you go hiking in Mount Rainier, which I would recommend, it's beautiful. Maybe when the weather gets nice, when I take a picture of Mount Rainier, right, the picture is a representation of the mountain, right? And hopefully us hiking. But we have to wonder, though, as philosophers, whether that is an accurate depiction of the way we acquire knowledge and truth, right? Because a lot of people might say, but those things aren't analogous. Me taking a picture of Mount Rainier is not analogous to me talking about the truths of the universe, right? So we might say the whole trouble with this approach is that beliefs and sentences are not like pictures of things. They are not even remotely like pictures. So the analogy doesn't hold. One other serious shortcoming of the correspondence theory is it assumes we are able to determine when our beliefs match a reality that is external to ourselves, right? A lot of people might point out here that we never have direct access to an external world. I can't get outside of my mind to go check something, right? It's not like we have that kind of God's eye view of the world. So do we really have ways of checking the correspondence? Our only access to an external world is through the information our senses provide. Thus, the criticism goes, we have no way of knowing whether that information is accurate because we cannot get beyond our senses to check out the external world. Another criticism centers on the notion of fact, right? Because again, some people might use truth and fact interchangeably, but maybe that distinction is really important. And so we might ask, well, you've told us what truth is. What's a fact on your view? It seems potentially impossible to define the fact to which a true statement is supposed to correspond without using the true statement itself, right? So the worry here is essentially that correspondence theorists are saying that truth is a fact and fact is a truth. But if we ask, well, where do we get that from? We can't just say facts come from truth and truth comes from facts, because that's circular reasoning, right? So some correspondence theorists respond to these accusations by claiming that fact means the same as actual state of affairs. However, it's unclear whether this really escapes the problem. But we should say, though, that lots of correspondence theorists have given answers to these criticisms, but we'll set those aside. But it's important to just keep in mind what some of these criticisms are so that we can think about them ourselves. Another problem is the problem of negative statements, right? So if we have a statement like no unicorns exist, well, what does that correspond to? Because if you're making a reference to something that doesn't even exist, what's the correspondence, right? How can you have a correspondence to a non-existent thing, right? Does it correspond to some negative state of affairs? You could also have a similar problem with hypothetical statements, like, things that if this were true, then this would happen. But if Anthony is the king of France, then Sophie is the queen of, some fictional place. I mean, what does that correspond to? Nothing, right? So that's something that correspondence theorists are going to have to account for. Okay, so definitely one of the more difficult views presented in the reading that I don't want to spend too much time on because it can get rather technical, and it's not really a very widely shared view, is what's called the semantic theory. And this is more of a successor to the correspondence theory. This is Alfred Tarski, so a little bit later than Bertrand Russell, 1902 to 1983. According to this view, talk of correspondence and facts is essentially eliminated, and instead we just need to look at language. So according to the semantic view, truth, whatever we mean by truth, is just ultimately tied up with language. There's no escaping it. Truth cannot be separated from language use. There's no truths or facts independent of language usage. It doesn't make sense to talk about truth out there or facts out there. We can only talk about truth when we compare it to the languages that are in use. So to see the semantic theory in use, consider the French phrase, la neige est blanche, which in English means snow is white. They express the same proposition. So according to Tarski, we would ask, under what conditions is that proposition true? Tarski argues that the proposition expressed by the English sentence, snow is white, is true if and only if snow is white. So it gives three conditions for any proposition to be considered true. The proposition expressed by the English or some other language sentence, snow is white, is true if and only if this is a relationship between the meaning of the proposition and what it aims to assert. And three, snow is white, the assertion. But notice here that this might sound a little confusing, but it's essentially just saying, according to some language, these things are true, right? That doesn't really, a lot of people might have a more intuitive notion of truth as being something bigger than that. It seems like to a lot of people, truth is something that is external to language, that there's actually truth out there. Some people don't think that's the case. Maybe you like the semantic view that truth can only be discussed relative to some language, right? And the conditions that the language gives for what truth is. That's really what the semantic theory is, talking about the meanings of words and the meaning of even the word truth. A lot of people, though, as I mentioned, find this view unmotivating. It seems to rely on a technical understanding of object and target languages, as you might have noticed in the reading, when truth seems to most to be a more intuitive concept that is language independent. And it seems to imply that truth cannot be divorced from language in any real tangible way. Maybe that's not a problem for you. Maybe you think, yeah, whatever we mean by truth, that's all it is. It's ultimately tied up with language.